Words to Live By, where each week we've been reading and walking through the New Testament letter to the church at Philippi. This was a church started by a man named Paul. And Paul started this church, and then he actually went to start other churches, went on different missionary journeys, and he found himself in prison for sharing his faith. And so he is writing a letter almost 2,000 years ago to this church that he started in the ancient city of Philippi. And he's writing to them, telling them how it is that they should live a life worth living. That if you want to live a life that actually means something, if you want to live a life that actually has some meaning to it, that actually will lead to fulfillment and actually lead to something that might feel like, okay, I'm getting to know the author of life himself, then Paul is writing for us, showing us how to live. And so that's what we're doing. We're walking verse by verse through this letter because if it was good enough 2,000 years ago for the church at Philippi, we believe, hey, we might have something we can learn from it today. And in fact, we can, because these aren't just a man named Paul's words. God himself was using Paul to deliver this message to them. So this is a timeless message about how you can live a life worth living. And a huge theme that Paul has been trying to cast throughout this letter so far, especially the past few weeks, and we've touched on it, we've seen it, is that all people anywhere and everywhere were created to live like Christ. That the desire of Paul and the desire of Christ is that we would live like him, that we would come into relationship with him, and then we would model our lives after how it is that Christ lived. And what we've seen is that how Christ lived, what he did by going to the cross for us, we just sang about it, right? What Christ did by humbling himself was that he didn't just humble himself one time, but his whole life on earth was characterized by humility. And that we are designed, we are created to run on, to model and live out humility, to adopt his mindset, to adopt his attitude with life, and to live that out. In short, what Paul explains is that Jesus' life was humble, he embodied humility, and if we want to live lives that matter, we too will lead humble lives. Not prideful lives, not self-centered lives, not selfish lives, not lives that maybe, just maybe when we look around, we see that it is common to live, but a life that is humble. And Paul promises that if we will do just that, if we will embody that humility, if everyone around us, if our whole church would say, hey, we're just gonna take up the mantle of humility, that we will make a difference in the lives of those around us. The world around us will be different if we will model humility. And in fact, he described it this way, and we talked about this last week, that the world is not changed by believers. Now that might catch you a little weirdly, but listen to what I'm saying. The world is not changed by believers who say they believe something but do nothing about it. The world is changed by doers, those believers who actually allow their faith to work itself out in their lives and the lives of those around them. And Paul actually said, if you will do that, if I will do that, if we will let our faith work itself out, we will shine like stars in the night sky. If we will live out humility, if we will work out our faith, if we will live out what it is that we say we believe, it will actually look like the stars in the night sky, lighting up the darkness around them, that no one can deny their presence, and that actually they're making a difference because they look so different from the norm. Which is pretty awesome to think that, like, if we lived a certain way, that the way Paul is describing us is that we would shine like stars. I mean, that's a pretty powerful image. It's a pretty powerful illustration of what we would be like. And I don't want others to look at my life, and I don't think that you want others to look at your life and say, well, you do not shine like a star. Actually, you look like the world around you. Because if that's what's happening, to our lives when others look around us, then we're really not making a difference in the world. We're not really embodying the life that Christ has called us to embody. And I fall short too many times to count. Maybe if you were being honest with me, you would say, Matt, I fall short too. I don't always shine like a star. And what we said last week is, wouldn't it be helpful Okay, this is the vision for our life, that we would live for Christ, that we would embody humility, and that as a result, we would shine like stars in a world that doesn't often shine like this because it's too focused on pride and selfishness. Wouldn't it be great if we had some examples of people that shined like stars? And so today, what we're gonna do is we're gonna actually look at 2 examples of men who were shining like stars that Paul holds up as the examples. As, hey, if you value this, if you say, hey, you wanna live like Christ, you wanna actually live out your faith, you wanna embody humility like Jesus and Jesus and modeling your life after him, it's like if I could just have an example of somebody that did that, it would feel more reachable, it would feel more attainable. Then Paul's about to give us those 2 people today. It's almost like if you've ever read a biography or you've ever watched a true story. I'm not talking about true Hollywood stories, okay? I'm not talking about that, all right? I'm talking about those stories of real people that inspire you to live differently. Like if you've ever been inspired by that, then today I think it's going to do the same for you as we look at these 2 men. Paul is writing from prison. He's going to give us examples. So who are they? Let's jump in. Here we go. Starting in verse 19 of Philippians chapter 2, we're just following Paul in his letter, and here's what he says. He's writing to the church at Philippi, and he says, I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you soon, that I also may be cheered when I receive news about you. Who's the first man that we're going to see that's going to inspire us and that is an example of shining like a star? It's Timothy. Timothy. Who is Timothy? Well, we read about him in several other New Testament books of the Bible, 1 Corinthians, 1st and 2nd Timothy, which are letters addressed to him by his name. Timothy was the pastor at the church of Ephesus. He was one of Paul's most trusted traveling companions as he went on his missionary journey starting these churches. And so Paul would send Timothy ahead of him or send Timothy back to address certain things at churches. Timothy was someone that Paul met, that he trusted, and that he really did pour into. Paul, in fact, believed so much in Timothy that he would sign a lot of his letters from, or Paul and Timothy. He wrote it, but he wanted people to know it wasn't just him writing this, Timothy was with him. He gave a lot of credence and credibility to Timothy's life. So Timothy was a big deal. And so what Paul is saying is, I'm going to send him to you, church at Philippi, to encourage you, and I look forward to hearing what he brings back about you to tell me how it is that you're doing. But what was it that made him shine like a star? What was it that made him an example of someone who embodies living out a life for Christ? Well, look at verse 20. We keep reading. Paul says about Timothy, I have no one else like him. Wow. Paul knew a lot of people, but he's saying there's no one else like Timothy. Okay, he must be a big deal. What was so good about him, Paul? I have no one else like him who will show genuine concern for your welfare. For everyone looks out for their own interest, not those of Jesus Christ. But you know that Timothy has proved himself because as a son with his father, he has served with me in the work of the gospel. I hope, therefore, to send him as soon as I see how things go with me. And I am confident in the Lord that I myself will come soon. All right, so if we're gonna live like Christ, if we're gonna see an example of what it looks like to actually shine like stars, what did Paul tell us about Timothy? First of all, Timothy showed genuine concern for others. Showed genuine concern for others. Then when he saw someone in need, he actually asked himself, is there something I can do to help them? When I see someone in need and I'm around them, I'm not gonna act like they don't matter. I'm gonna show genuine concern for their welfare. So basically, if you are showing genuine concern for people, that's one of the ways that you're shining like stars, because to show genuine concern for people, you have to be humble enough to notice them. How many times do we go through life and go through our day and we're so focused on the next thing, we have no margin in our lives, or we're so focused on our own needs that we don't even see those around us that are in need. Not Timothy. That wasn't what characterized Timothy. Timothy actually showed genuine concern. But look on. He says he also doesn't just look out for his own interest like most everyone else. He wasn't so self-consumed. He thought about others. He has served alongside of Paul in the work of the gospel. Paul talks about that he was a coworker. He partnered with him. He could trust him. So he served others. And he has proven himself, Paul said. I love that phrase. He has proven himself. Paul watched Timothy's life before seeking him out. Doesn't mean that he waited for him to be perfect. He wasn't. He was a young man at the time that Paul got him to come alongside of him in his work. But he did prove himself. We don't know for how long, but for a period of time, Paul watched to make sure he had high character before sending him out. He made sure that he was someone who already was serving and valuing others before he sent him out to represent him. And Paul says, hey, he wasn't impatient to just have a position of leadership. He was willing to serve faithfully, however long it might take, until Paul would see that, hey, he's someone that he can trust. But did you notice there's one statement that I want to spend a little bit more time on? Notice again, if you look back at verse 22, Paul says, but you know that Timothy has proved himself because as a son with his father, he has served with me in the work of the gospel. Now, Paul was not Timothy's daddy, all right? They were not related by blood. So this is not talking about a biological bond, but many pastors and scholars have pointed out that this is simply a reference to the mentoring relationship that Paul had with Timothy. Paul viewed himself like a spiritual father to Timothy and viewed Timothy like a spiritual son to him. Paul was so focused on developing and mentoring and growing Timothy that he referred to him as his son in the faith, his son in the ministry, if you will. In fact, other places in the New Testament, Paul refers to Timothy explicitly in this way. In 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 2, Paul literally says, hey, Timothy, the things that I've trained you in, now I want you to train others. Translation, I've been a spiritual father to you, and so now I want you to be a spiritual father to others. And this is a really big deal because for Timothy to be an example that Paul is holding up, this is something we should not overlook, because to be a mentee in a mentor relationship, or maybe you've heard it called disciplee in a discipling relationship, to receive discipleship, something has to be true about you. You have to be willing to take correction. You have to be willing to take constructive criticism. You have to be willing to be sharpened. You have to be willing to be called out. You have to not take yourself too seriously. You can't be like so many today, so easily offended by everything. Like you've got to be willing for somebody to call you out and you say, well, how dare you? And like want to file a lawsuit because of something that they said to you, right? Let's come on. Like you've got to actually be willing to receive correction, receive discipleship, receive sharpening, and want it. Seek it out. And that's what characterized Timothy. He didn't think he knew it all. He found and entrusted himself to someone that was more spiritually mature than him, and asked to become more like Christ through the example of Paul, and for Paul, who had been walking with Christ longer, to sharpen him and tell him how it is that he needed to grow. He invited feedback into his life. His humility was demonstrated. He shined like a star. Why? Because he was developed. It's so funny. We do this in every other area of our life. If you're in business, if you're in any industry that you're in, like it's the whole idea of let me find somebody that does what I do, but does it at a better level, a greater level, a better discipline. If you're a doctor, let me find a doctor that's been doing it longer. If you're a teacher, let me find a teacher that's been doing it longer. Like we seek it out because we want to develop. A lot of times promotions are literally dependent upon you finding someone better at what you do because you don't know what you don't know. So let me learn from someone else that's done it longer and done it better so that I can get better. In sports, we do it all the time. Right? How many athletes have personal trainers outside of their formal practices, right? So if this is true in every other area of life, why do we think it's not true when it comes to our spiritual life? Like, why do we think, oh, well, I'll just figure it out on my own? No, Paul knew, no, you can't figure it out on your own. And Timothy was willing to take mentorship, discipleship from someone further along in the faith that wanted to say to him, this is how it's done. This is how you can become like Christ. And so here's my question for you. Here's my question for everyone. If you're watching online, if you're in the room, who is your Paul? Do you have a Paul in your life? If you desire to shine like a star, if you desire to embody humility, if you desire to live like Christ, I promise you it's going to be very difficult, if not next to impossible, if you do not have someone in your life that you are asking to mentor you, that you are watching for how they live, and you're inviting them to constructively sharpen you, critique you, help you come like Christ. We can and should all identify someone. I've had many Pauls in my life. Currently, I have 2 or 3 men that I look to, that I talk to on a regular basis, that are not afraid to tell me the truth, that I know if they tell me something that's difficult to hear, it's not because they hate me, it's in fact because they love me and they want what's best for me, right? It's not comfortable. Like if you're looking for a pick-me-up, then don't do this, right? It's not like exciting, but it's a process that on the other side of it will actually reap what it is that Paul is writing about and talking about, humility. You can't become like who Christ wants you to be, which is humble, if you don't first humble yourself and receive and ask and look for someone to pour into you. And so men, I just want to challenge you. Find another man that can pour into you, that will at least allow you to watch their life, that will at least allow you to ask them certain questions about how you can become more like Christ in a certain area. Women, find another woman that you can look to that's more mature. And here's the thing that's really important. This is not about age. This is about spiritual maturity. It's finding someone more spiritually mature than you that can then pour into you. And it doesn't have to be a formal relationship. It can just be, hey, I've watched how you live, and I just have a question. And here's the thing. I've been at this church now for 7, 8 weeks. I've not been here long. Okay, I'm new. So if you're new, welcome. I'm new too, all right? But I've been here long enough to realize that there are some spiritually mature men and women that would be willing to pour into other people if they were to be asked, hey, I just have a question. Could you show me? Could you help me in this area? They would probably be taken back. They would probably not think themselves worthy, which is a sign of maturity, right? Because they're living out humility. But I bet they would be willing to answer questions that you have. Do you have a Paul? That's what Timothy shows us. And so if you don't know people, if you're new here, one of the easiest ways you can get to know people is by joining a life group. And then you'll surround yourselves with people that you do not know. And then you'll start to see maybe who you want to pour into you. And you'll also see maybe some people you don't want to pour into you. And that's okay. That's all right, right? So Timothy, that's what we learned from Timothy. How to shine like a star. Man, maybe we care about others. We don't look out for our own interests. We serve alongside of one another in the ministry. We find someone more spiritually mature to develop our character. But what's next? Who's next? Here we go. Verse 25, the second man that Paul gives us is we're going to find out. He said, verse 25, but I think it is necessary to send back to you Epaphroditus. There's my guy right there. I've been joking about him the past few weeks, Epaphroditus. I've joked that if you're pregnant right now and you are having a baby boy, that would be a strong name. Epaphroditus. And it would be a strong name. It really would. And I don't say that just because it's a fun name to say, but because of what his name embodies. But the other night, my daughter, she was asking me, hey, so what are you going to be teaching on this Sunday? And I said, oh, I'm going to be here. And I was really excited about it. And I said, I'm talking about somebody with a funny name. And she was like, what's his name? And I said, well, you read it. And so I showed her, and she read it, and she said, oh, Epaphroditus? And I was like, well, babe, that sounds like a dermatological skin condition, what you just said. No. It's Epaphroditus, not Epaphroditus, right? But I was just joking with her. And here's the thing. This is really important. When you get to words in the Bible that you don't know how to say them, just make up something funny because it doesn't matter. Don't let not knowing how to say the words stop you from getting the deeper truth. And the deeper truth of Epaphroditus is that there is something incredibly important for us to learn about him. Because he was the second example that Paul holds up like an example and says, hey, this guy shines like a star. This guy embodies humility. This guy is living his life for Christ. So let's learn from him. But unlike Timothy, who was well known throughout the New Testament and the other churches, Epaphroditus, the only time we learn about Epaphroditus is within the letter of Philippians. Because Epaphroditus was sent by the church at Philippi for a specific purpose. He was sent to encourage and to meet the needs of Paul. Because remember, Paul was in prison. The church at Philippi knew that. And prisons 2,000 years ago were not like prisons today. Prisons today, okay, I'm not glamorizing them, but I am saying if you go to prison, your needs will be met, okay? You will have a bed to sleep on. You will have food brought to you. In this time, if you wanted your needs to be met, you had to have a benefactor. You had to have somebody on the outside that would send you money to buy your needs or would bring something for you to supply your needs. And so the church at Philippi loved Paul, and they sent Epaphroditus as a representative of their church to bring Paul what it was that he needed. And so that's who Epaphroditus is. And Paul is writing to them and telling them, hey, he has done what you sent him for, and I'm about to send him back to you. But look again at verse 25. Look at how Paul describes his feelings about Epaphroditus based on who he is. He says, Epaphroditus, my brother, co-worker, fellow soldier, who is also your messenger, whom you sent to take care of my needs, or whom you sent as a minister, someone to meet my needs. Again, just like Paul wasn't Timothy's daddy, Paul is not Epaphroditus' brother. This is familial language that Paul is using that no doubt if you have put your faith in Christ, no matter who you are or where you're from, we are spiritually related brothers and sisters, but there's a deeper meaning here that Paul is talking about. He's talking about, man, he has loved me like a brother. He's loved me like a brother. He hasn't forgotten me. He's my co-worker. He partners with me in ministry. He serves. He's my fellow soldier. Epaphroditus understands that we're in a spiritual battle between good and evil, and sharing the gospel is not just a walk in the park, but it's literally spiritual warfare. When you share the gospel with someone, when you share the good news about Jesus with someone, it's as if you're waging, Paul would talk about this in other parts of the New Testament, it's like you're waging spiritual battle. Because while your father that we sang about earlier this morning, just a few minutes ago, while your father deeply loves you, there's an enemy that wants nothing more than to steal, kill, and destroy you. And that's a spiritual battle. And Paul says, hey, Epaphroditus gets that. Epaphroditus is my fellow soldier in the ministry. He's also a messenger, a faithful messenger. What's the goal of a messenger? It's not to bring your own ideas. It's simply to deliver the message. Epaphroditus did what the church at Philippi wanted him to do. He brought a message about how they were doing. He brought funds to take care of Paul's needs. And then, I love this, he didn't just bring the money. Paul says that he took care of his needs. He took seriously the call to minister to the needs that Paul had for the specified time that he was there. But what else? Paul says, thank you for sending him to me, but I'm writing you to let you know that I'm sending him back. Why? Look at verse 26. For he, that is Epaphroditus, he longs for all of you. Who is all of you? The church at Philippi. Epaphroditus longs for you and is distressed because you heard he was ill. So Epaphroditus has come down with something, a sickness. He's ill. And it's stressing him out because he knows that the church is concerned about him, and so he longs for them. Verse 27, but Paul says, indeed, he was ill and almost died. But God had mercy on him, and not on him only, but also on me, to spare me sorrow upon sorrow. Therefore, I am all the more eager to send him, so that when you see him again, you may be glad, and I may have less anxiety. Something happened, we don't know what, but in getting aid to Paul, Epaphroditus gets so sick that he almost dies. And somehow, maybe through some other correspondence that we don't have records of, the church at Philippi knows that he's sick, and Paul is writing to say, hey, I'm going to send him back to you because I know you're concerned about him, and he's concerned about your concern for him. But don't think, Paul is writing to tell them, don't think he did anything wrong, or that he was halfway doing it, or that he allowed his sickness to keep him from meeting my needs. On the contrary, look at verse 29. He says, welcome him, when I send him back, welcome him, that is Epaphroditus, welcome him in the Lord with great joy. And honor people like him because he almost died for the work of Christ. He risked his life to make up for the help you yourselves could not give me. So what's Paul saying to the church at Philippi? Hey, Epaphroditus served me, and it's not just that he caught a cold, he almost died, and he didn't just almost die playing video games or just hanging out. He almost died for the work of Christ. Paul is showing the Philippians that they need to understand the context of him almost dying. It was while in service to him for the work of Christ. So what does that reveal about Epaphroditus' heart? It reveals that Epaphroditus was not going haphazardly into the danger zone. He wasn't being careless. That's not why he almost died. He literally almost died while in service to Christ. Epaphroditus' heart was one that loved and prioritized Jesus and his message above all things, even if that meant his life was at risk. Let me say it again. Epaphroditus, his life shows us that you can be so in love with and so prioritize Jesus and his message that you actually are willing to do that, even if it means your life is at risk. Paul is saying, hey, when you see people in the church that are willing to sacrifice, are willing to make a sacrifice, are willing to sacrifice their preferences, their comfort, their time. When you see people in the church that are willing to invest their time, their talent, their resources, like when you see those people, Paul says you should honor them. Like that's a really big deal. Why? Because when you honor someone, you're literally lifting them up as an example that is worthy of applause and emulation. That's not trying to glorify the person. That's saying, hey, what this person represents is so worthy of replication that we want to hold them up so that everyone in the church will see that what they're doing is what we all should be doing. That who they are and the sacrifice that they're willing to make, that is a picture, a tangible picture of what should be normalized in the church. That it's not just one person in the church that's willing to sacrifice their time, talent, resources, inconvenience themselves and give up comfort and convenience for the work of Christ. No. What would happen if we all became like that? That's why Paul's saying honor these types of people. People that are willing to serve and humble themselves for the cause of Christ. That's who we should honor. And if you have a problem with honoring certain people, it's like, well, this is not saying that all people are not worthy of honor. They are, because every human life is precious. We're all created in God's image, and every single person on the planet that ever has or will live, you can know how valuable they are because you can look them in the eyes and know that Christ died for them, right? So it's just not about the value of human life, but it is about not all people are worthy of honor in the same way because not all people have sacrificed for Christ in how it is that Paul's talking about here. They just haven't. And if that's not about an inequality of worth, it's literally a disproportionate reality of what some have sacrificed and others haven't. And Paul says, hey, when you see that people have sacrificed, if you see someone that it's cost them something for Christ, he's saying you should honor them. Epaphroditus is that type of guy. So it got me thinking, how can we honor the Epaphroditus in our church? Who are the Epaphroditus in our church? Like Paul says, hey, you should honor people that have sacrificed, right? And so it got me thinking, and so how can we honor the Epaphroditus? Who are the Epaphroditus? Number one, I think we should publicly acknowledge them because Paul publicly acknowledged them, right? Paul literally wrote to this church at Philippi, and this letter would have been read to the group, and it would have been read, hey, church at Philippi, you should honor Epaphroditus, right? So, I mean, Epaphroditus probably would have been awkward, especially if Epaphroditus was the one reading the letter. Hey, you should honor people like Epaphroditus. That's me. I don't know. I'm just reading what Paul told me to write. So publicly acknowledge them. So who should we publicly acknowledge? Anyone who sacrifices their time, talent, resources. Anyone who invests their time, talent, resources. Anyone in our church who sacrifices any degree of comfort or convenience for the cause of Christ. And so it got me thinking, we have an incredible ministry called Radical Heart. We have people in our church that will give up some of their Wednesday night, some of their Thursday morning to go and serve people in our community. Many of whom we will never see again, some of whom we will, but none of which we should expect anything in return because these are people that are in need in our community. And we have people in our church that have said, hey, I'm going to come alongside of and I'm going to serve them. I think we should honor those people, Radical Heart volunteers, preschool and children's volunteers. Did you know there's people right now in the garage, which is where our kindergarten through fifth graders are right now, and if we might have some in the room right now, that's awesome, but a lot of our K through fifth grade, we have volunteers that are up there. Did you know that we have a preschool ministry? That every week we have people that are holding my baby, right? Holding your babies, right? And that's amazing. Like we need to honor those people that serve in Treehouse, that serve in Garage. Why? Because they are sacrificing being in this room, being in a group so that they can serve. That's amazing. We need to honor those people. We have student ministry volunteers. We have life group leaders that prepare throughout the week. They take time outside of and away from their family time, away from their free time that they could have to teach. We have deacons in this church. We have, I don't know if you knew this, and I'm not going to be able to say everybody. Remember, I'm new. Give me some grace, all right? I'm not going to remember everybody that does this. But did you know that this morning we had 16 people that went to New Orleans on a mission trip? Like, that's amazing, right? You can clap for that, yeah. Like, we had people that said, hey, I'm gonna actually take off work to go share the gospel and serve a church in need in New Orleans. Did you know that we have the Gale family that I have not had the privilege of meeting, that are a part of our church, that felt as if God was calling them to Africa? And like they went. Like they sacrificed career, they sacrificed being away from family. Like they went. Do you know we have a man named Lincoln Villette who serves in Africa now from our church? Leads a ministry called Elevate Ethiopia. Like that's amazing. Like that's a big deal. These, like, if Epaphroditus was the church at Philippi's example of, hey, look at humility, look at people that are shining like Christ. How are they shining like Christ? Because they're willing to sacrifice. The degrees of sacrifice will look different for all of us. Not everyone is going to go to Africa, but some do. Not everyone is going to be able to go on a mission trip, but some do. Not everyone serves in a ministry, but some do. The degree of sacrifice will look different for all of us. But the question is, when we meet people, when we know of people in our church that have sacrificed for Christ and are serving and are on mission, we should honor them. Why? Because Paul told us to, but because by honoring them and lifting them up, we are literally lifting up the example of what we all should seek to embody. We should publicly acknowledge them. How else can we honor the Epaphroditus in our church? We can say thank you individually. When you pick up your child at preschool or at the garage, you better say thank you. Come on, right? Like, we better say thank you. They are serving. Like, let's say thank you. That's just a small way of saying thank you. When someone greets you at the door and you're new, man, I hope that makes you feel warm and welcome. But if you're a member here, when you walk by someone that has a lanyard on that's on our Connect team, that's on our security team, just say thank you. Thank you for serving. Thank you for keeping us safe. Thank you for welcoming guests. It goes a long way, and it elevates, it honors those who serve. So we can publicly call them out as an example. We can thank them individually. But then you know how I think we can really honor them? We can seek to live an honorable life ourselves. One of the things that is so clear to me is when I see someone who is worthy of honor, it causes me to want to honor them by living a life that is what they have embodied. When I see someone who is worthy of honor, I want to live like them. And I think that for those that serve in this church, those that go out, their desire is not that we would look at them any differently as like a different species. I think their desire is that we would just do likewise. Because if we want to honor Christ with our lives, if we want to live for Christ, if we want to shine like stars, we cannot do so if we ourselves aren't willing to live similarly. There's really one last thing that it takes to shine like a star. And if you're here this morning and you're saying, Matt, this is a big deal. I want to do this. Look at verse 30 one more time. He, that is Paul talking about Epaphroditus, risked his life to make up for the help you, the church at Philippi, yourselves, could not give me. What's the other thing that's really big about Epaphroditus? He was willing. What Paul is communicating is that Epaphroditus was willing to do something and was worthy to do something in his character that the rest of the congregation, we don't know why, but they could not give it. He was willing to go. Have you considered that maybe the only thing standing between you shining like a star, me shining like a star, embodying the character of Christ, living for Christ, the only thing standing between you becoming like Epaphroditus, which was living like Christ, is your willingness to say yes. Like whatever reason that you might have as to why you can't serve, as to why you can't invest in the church, do you realize that all we read about Epaphroditus and Timothy were character qualities? Like if you think, well, I'm not talented enough, we will train you. If you think, well, I don't know details about a mission trip, we can tell you. If you say, well, I just don't know if I don't know if I can. Do you realize that God uses your willingness and will break through whatever excuse we make if he's in it? Just be willing. Just be willing. Just be willing and watch what God does. In a few weeks, we're gonna have a missions emphasis where in our entire lobby, it's gonna be taken over by what we are doing for the upcoming year for missions. There's gonna be opportunities for you to serve. I'm excited about the ways you're gonna be able to serve tangibly on that day with some key ministries, partners that we have. But maybe this morning you're like, okay, Matt, I need to sign up to serve. You know, I tell you every week on that yes card, if you're new, fill out that yes card, don't check any boxes, and you can put it in the basket as you leave. But today I've got another one for you. If you're like, okay, Matt, I need to serve, I'm willing. Fill out that yes card, don't check any boxes, and just write on the back of it, serve. And we'll get you connected in a way you can serve. Don't worry about the where and how this morning, though. Just say yes and let God fill in the where and the how. Just say yes and watch what God does. Father, I thank you that we have human examples of those that have followed Jesus. God, might they inspire us to follow him as well. God, I thank you for so many of the Epaphroditus that we have in our church, so many of the Timothys that just serve. God, we talked about so many things this morning, so many character qualities that would cause us to shine like stars. God, I pray that at least one of them connected with everyone in here as something we can put into practice that will be us truly embracing humility and living like Christ. But God, help us if there's any hesitation about details, about excuses, to not let anything stand in the way of our willingness. Help us to just say yes, and then God, you fill in the details. You fill in the where, you fill in the what. But help us say yes. And as we say yes, might you help us realize that it's exactly what we were created for. In Jesus' name, amen.